Luge is one of the fastest, most unforgiving, and least understood events in the Olympic Games. To most casual viewers, it looks deceptively simple: an athlete lying on a small sled, feet first, racing down an icy track. But that surface simplicity hides a deep history of evolution, danger, engineering, and obsession with control at the edge of physics. The story of luge begins long before it ever became an Olympic sport, and long before tracks were artificially refrigerated or sleds were engineered to millimeter tolerances. It begins with people sliding downhill on snow for necessity, not sport. Centuries ago, in alpine regions of Europe, particularly in what are now Austria, Switzerland, and parts of Italy, sleds were basic tools. Farmers, hunters, and villagers used them to transport goods, firewood, and supplies down steep mountain paths during winter. These early sleds were crude, often wooden platforms with runners, guided by rope or body weight. Speed was incidental, survival and practicality were the goal. But as often happens with human invention, what began as utility slowly turned into competition. By the 18th and 19th centuries, people in alpine villages began racing sleds for fun. These informal contests took place on natural snow roads, village paths, and mountain passes. There were no standardized rules, no protective gear, and no safety barriers. Steering was done by shifting body weight or dragging a foot. Crashes were common, injuries were expected, still the thrill was undeniable. The first known organized sled races appeared in the mid 19th century, particularly in Switzerland. St. Moritz became a focal point. Wealthy British tourists visiting the Alps for winter holidays encountered local sledding traditions and brought with them a competitive spirit. What followed was the gradual formalization of sled racing as a sport rather than a pastime. This period also saw the birth of multiple sled disciplines. Skeleton emerged first, characterized by athletes sliding headfirst on a flat sled. Bobsleigh followed, involving teams and enclosed sleds. Luge, sliding feet first on a small open sled, developed alongside these but remained closer to its folk origins for much longer. The word luge itself comes from the French term for sled. In France and neighboring regions, sledding feet first became the preferred style, partly because it allowed better visibility and marginally more control on winding tracks. As competition intensified, sled design evolved. Early luge sleds were still wooden, with iron runners. Over time, metal frames replaced wood, and runners became more refined. Athletes began to experiment with body position, realizing that even small changes in posture could dramatically affect speed and stability. By the late 19th century, organized luge competitions were being held regularly in the Alps. Clubs formed, informal rules emerged, but the sport remained fragmented, with different regions favoring different styles and standards. The 20th century changed everything. With the rise of international sport and the Olympic movement, winter sports began to standardize. Bobsleigh made its Olympic debut in 1924. Skeleton appeared briefly, then disappeared. Luge, however, was not yet ready. One reason was infrastructure. Early luge races were held on natural tracks, roads carved into mountainsides that followed existing terrain. These tracks varied wildly in length, steepness, and danger. Standardizing competition across countries was nearly impossible. Another issue was perception. Luge was seen as too dangerous, too regional, and too similar to other sled sports to justify Olympic inclusion. Still, the sport continued to develop. After World War II, Europe began rebuilding not just cities but cultural institutions. Winter sports gained renewed attention. Artificial ice tracks began to appear, allowing for more consistent conditions and safer competition. These tracks were refrigerated, banked, and engineered with precision. This technological leap was crucial for luge. Artificial tracks allowed organizers to control speed, curvature, and safety zones. They also allowed luge to distinguish itself clearly from skeleton and bobsleigh. The feet first position, combined with refined steering techniques using calves, shoulders, and subtle weight shifts, became the defining characteristic of the sport. In 1957, the first World Luge Championships were held. This marked a turning point. International governing bodies began to formalize rules, equipment standards, and competition formats. Luge was no longer a folk sport, it was becoming elite. The Olympic breakthrough came in 1964. The Innsbruck Winter Olympics introduced luge as an official Olympic sport, featuring men's singles, women's singles, and doubles events. This inclusion was a milestone, but it came with controversy. Tragically, the sport's dangers were highlighted when British luger Kazimierz Kai Skrzypewski was killed during training runs before the Games. His death shocked the Olympic community and forced immediate safety reassessments. Despite the tragedy, the events proceeded and Luge captured global attention. Audiences were struck by the speed. Athletes reached velocities exceeding 80 miles per hour, inches from ice walls, with no brakes and no steering wheel. The margin for error was non existent. Luge was immediately recognized as one of the most extreme Olympic disciplines. From that point on, Luge's Olympic history became one of incremental refinement. Safety improvements were introduced. Track designs became more sophisticated with higher walls, smoother transitions, and better crash protection. Helmets and protective suits were standardized. Equipment regulations tightened to prevent technological advantages from overwhelming athletic skill. Yet the essence of the sport remained unchanged. Luge is about precision. Athletes steer not by turning anything, but by applying pressure with their calves, thighs, shoulders, and core muscles. A few grams of force in the wrong place can mean the difference between a podium finish and a crash. Reaction times are measured in thousandths of a second. Runs are often decided by hundredths, sometimes thousandths. This demanded a new kind of athlete. Lugers train extensively in strength, particularly in the neck, core, and legs. They develop extreme spatial awareness. They memorize tracks in obsessive detail, knowing every curve, every compression, every transition. Many train on dry land using wheeled sleds or track simulations. Mental rehearsal is as important as physical conditioning. Over time, national dominance emerged. Germany became the undisputed powerhouse of luge. The sport's roots in Central Europe, combined with state supported training programs and advanced track access, allowed German athletes to refine technique at a level few could match. Austria and Italy also became strong contenders, while Russia developed its own elite program. The United States and Canada, lacking the same density of tracks, faced greater challenges. Still, dedicated athletes emerged, often training abroad or relocating to Europe to gain experience. Luge also continued to evolve within the Olympics. The doubles event gained prominence, showcasing the complexity of two athletes coordinating body movements at extreme speed. Team relay events were introduced later, combining men's singles, women's singles, and doubles runs into a single combined result, adding strategic depth and spectator appeal. But Luge's history cannot be told without addressing its risks. Despite safety improvements, the sport remains dangerous. Crashes can be catastrophic. The most infamous modern tragedy occurred before the 2010 Vancouver Olympics when Georgian luger Nodar Kumaritashvili was killed during a training run after being thrown from the track at high speed. The incident sparked global outrage and forced immediate changes. Track modifications were made overnight, start positions were lowered, safety protocols were reevaluated. The tragedy underscored the reality that even with modern engineering, luge exists on the edge of what is physically survivable. That danger is not incidental, it is intrinsic. Luge athletes accept that reality as part of the sport. They are not reckless, but they understand that mastery involves confronting fear rather than avoiding it. Many describe luge as a dialogue with gravity, speed, and control, where confidence must coexist with humility. Technological debates have also shaped luge's evolution. Sled design, runner steel composition, and suit materials are tightly regulated to prevent arms races. The International Luge Federation constantly adjusts rules to balance innovation and fairness. Even minute changes in ice temperature or humidity can affect outcomes, making consistency a constant challenge. Despite these complexities, luge remains one of the purest expressions of winter sport. There is no team blocking, no external interference, no equipment that can correct mistakes. Once the sled leaves the start, the athlete is alone with physics. That purity is part of its appeal. In recent decades, luge has struggled with visibility outside Olympic cycles. It is not widely televised outside major events. Tracks are expensive to build and maintain, access remains limited. Yet during the Olympics, luge captures attention precisely because it looks impossible. Viewers watch and instinctively ask how. How do they steer? How do they stay on the track? How do they survive those speeds? The answer is history. Centuries of sliding downhill evolved into a science of control. Folk tradition became elite discipline. Wooden sleds became precision instruments, and necessity became mastery. Today, luge stands as a reminder of what the Olympic Games were always meant to celebrate, not just strength or speed, but human willingness to refine a skill to its absolute limit, to take something simple, sliding downhill, and turn it into a discipline requiring total commitment of body and mind. The history of luge is not flashy. It is not loud. It is not easily explained. but it is profound. It tells the story of how humans learned to ride gravity itself, not by overpowering it, but by understanding it so deeply that they could guide it inch by inch, curve by curve, at speeds most people cannot even imagine. That is why Luge remains one of the most respected events in the Olympic Games, not because it is safe, not because it is accessible, but because it represents control in its purest form. And that is a legacy built over centuries, not seconds.